announcements. The first is I'd like to announce that our third annual Halloween at the Archives is this Friday, October 25th. Join us from 4:30 to 7 for family-friendly activities, crafts, a scavenger hunt, prizes, and more. Then from 7 to 7:30, we will have a costume parade, a cakewalk, and a dance party on our front terrace. The best part about this is it's completely free to the public. So please, and all ages are welcome. So please come see us this Friday from 4:30 to 7:30. I'd also like to announce that on Monday, November 4th, we will have our next research rundown. That's going to be an online program as our reference archivist, Kayla Scott Gerner, presents on how to research your ancestors' War of 1812 service. And so that's going to be an online program on Facebook and YouTube. And then on Thursday, November 14th, we will host a book talk with Catherine Brond, who will present on her new book, Mapping Conquest, the Battle Maps of Horseshoe Bend. So look for that at noon here in the Farley, Catherine Brond on Mapping Conquests. Lastly, on November 21st, our Food for Thought series continues as Montgomery Orchestra conductor Jamie Reeves presents Symphonic Composers of Alabama, the works of William Dawson, Margaret Bonds, and others. So hope to see you there at noon in the Farley Auditorium on Thursday, November 21st. I'd also like to thank the Alabama Humanities Alliance and the Friends of the Alabama Archives for making today's program possible. Now, normally this is when I would introduce our speaker, but I'm actually going to bring up Dr. John Harden, the Museum Division Director here at the Archives, and my boss's boss.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very grateful for all of you being here and in person and online. This is a really special program, and I'm very thankful that Mac Ice has come all the way from Abilene, Texas, to speak to us on this topic. So I'm first going to read the bio blurb, the capsule bio of Mac, and then I'm going to give you a little background on how this came to be. So Mac Ice, or McGarvey Ice, he's named after a preacher, is Associate Professor of Library Science and Director of Special Collections and Archives at Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. He holds a Master of Library and Information Science from the University of North Texas and seminary degrees from Lipscomb University. In addition to his education in church history and library science, Ice has nearly 20 years of professional experience in denominational archives. He has served various churches as minister or volunteer for 30 years. And there's a lot more that you could say about what Mac has accomplished in his professional career. And he's also working on a doctorate right now, writing the dissertation as we speak on the church history topic. But I first met Mac, about 20 years ago, even though it might have been 30, I don't know. But he, at various points, has been the caretaker of some records I used in some research I was doing. And Mitch Henry, this all came about because the president of Faulkner University, Mitch Henry, who is on his way here. He's getting box lunches for himself and my father, Clinton Harden. Dad, I'm calling you out, so raise your hand. So happy to have my father here. I'm his namesake. He's John Clinton Harden Jr. I'm John Clinton Harden III. And so Mitch visited Abilene last year, or a couple years ago, met Mac, learned that Mac had this really interesting collection of baptismal records of baptismal backgrounds that had been painted around the country by someone who is a relative of Mitch's. It's Blanche Perry. So they got to know each other. I don't know how the invitation happened, but Mitch invited Mac to come speak at the Faulkner University lectures, which are happening this week. And Mac gave a couple of talks yesterday. I heard the evening talk. It was very good. And Mitch suggested, hey, would the archives be interested in maybe doing a program on church records? Maybe Mac would like to do that. Actually, I don't guess we really asked Mac. We just said, hey, Mac, will you do this? And so Faulkner University is sharing Mac with us for this program. Really appreciate their support. Maybe when Mitch walks in balancing the box lunches and the waters, you can giving him applause, and he'll wonder why you're clapping. But we're really happy to have this program. Oh, there he is, Mitch Henry. Mitch, I just bragged on you. All right, but you don't have boxed lunches. So, right down here. So without further ado, we're going to have a great hour-and-a-half session, special program for Archives Month on I Love to Save the Story, How to Preserve Your Church and Congregational Records. Please welcome Mac Ice.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon to all of you who are here in person and those of you that are watching. I'm grateful for your attendance here, and I hope that we'll have a really generative hour and a half together. I hope this will generate your thinking. I suspect you're here because you're already excited and interested and invested in your own congregation's history. I suspect you probably are the person that people are already going to with questions about the history, or you tell us why do we do this again, or who was that person again? So you probably are already that person. It may be that you're not and you're interested and you're kind of scoping that out and thinking about that. Maybe this will be inspiring. I hope it won't scare you off where you think, what have I gotten myself into? I think I'll do something else. Okay, I don't want to scare you off. I want to make this accessible. I think you can do a great thing for your church, a great service for your church or your congregation by helping to preserve the materials that your congregation has generated as they have done what they've done. So let's go through. In general terms, or in broad terms, the program kind of identifies some goals that we have for today. First being, identify and gather. Those two kind of hang together. Then we've got preservation and accessibility. And those two are going to kind of hang together. I'm going to spend a lot of time with identifying and gathering. And again, what I hope this will do will be generative as you think about maybe what you know is in the closet at church or in the shoebox or in the trunk under the bed, or what you know someone has at home or what you know is already at church. Maybe it will be generative for you to kind of think, I didn't think about this or that or something else. Or I haven't considered this source in this way. Maybe you're already in the process of preserving and saving these records, and your goal is some type of church history book or some type of published history. And maybe some of what we say will be generative along those lines. Along the way, I'd like to just kind of make observations. Just kind of make an observation, throw a thought out there. And my goal with the observations is how we can use these materials. So I've got an eye towards utility. And by utility, using it to teach your church about themselves or tell the stories that they may not know or may have been forgotten, or sharing the fruits of your research. It may be that you've got a stock of stories that you tell about the matriarch or the patriarch of your congregation, or the story of the building or the story of the moves of the church. Well, we were on the outside of town, and then the town grew and we built a new building, we moved over here, and then we did this, we did that. That's just kind of common part of the storytelling, the memory keeping. Kind of like we all get together around Thanksgiving. I know my family has stories they tell on me every time. You know, if something happens, you just know that's going to trigger that story. And I just kind of, do this and wait for the story to come, and they tell the story. That kind of happens in our churches. It may be the fruit of your research will surface new information that you want to share. So I've got an eye on the utility angle, meaning how can we use these to help tell those stories or discover some new information? So that's kind of the broad outline of what I'd like to do. There we go. Okay, learn how this clicker works. Identifying records is more than choosing what to keep or throw away. So we'll just start with an observation right off the bat. There is that decision that needs to be made. What do we keep? What do we throw away? I've anecdotally drawing from experience of working with people, they say, I've got this closet full of things at church and I don't know what to do with it. And it's a little intimidating. It's also very interesting. I'm afraid I'll throw away something that needs to be kept, but I'm also afraid that I'll keep something that's no good, useless, and I can't right now feel like I can make that choice. Help me make that choice. Okay, so there is that choice that needs to be made. Also, and that's part of it, also I have that second sentence, identifying records also means kind of training ourselves to see possibilities in the records for research and understanding. I hope that what we'll do today will be generative along those lines, that we can kind of help train ourselves to see the possibilities in the different types of records. And that kind of gets into a historical analysis approach of how do we use these sources to tell a story? How do we pull together information from many different sources, many different places, and then craft a narrative that explains our origins, explains our values, explains why we do what we do, and how we've come to where we are, and what we hold to be important? Okay, so there's kind of two levels. There's a very practical level of I've got a shoebox in front of me, I don't know what to do with it. But then there's that deeper level of I've got all this material and I want to do something more than just make a decision about keep or toss. Okay, here's an item that conveys a story that reflects something that we very deeply hold to be important. Okay. Dictionary.archivist.org, the Dictionary of Archival Terminology. I think I'd like to start here by trying to get a handle on what do I mean by record. Okay, so you could go to the online Dictionary of Archives Terminology and browse or search and learn a lot. And it's kind of like, what's the lingo of this field? So when I say records, I kind of have a technical definition in my mind, and I don't know what you have in your mind when you hear the word records. Okay, so I thought, well, why don't we just start here briefly, see what they say, and use that as a jumping off point. There's the dictionary definition, the internal lingo of how the archivists are going to use this in professional terms. It is, well, if you look at number 3, that's probably what we think. We think records, we think LPs. And that's true, right? What a phonodisc, that's a record. Or to record, the verb form, right? To record something, or a recording. But a record in this context, since we're at the Alabama Department of Archives and History, in this specific technical term, has a usage of, well, one, it's data stored on a medium, which is just information on an object of some kind. It could be a digital object, but an object of some kind that helps me remember, helps us remember. It's an extension of human memory, or keeps us accountable. I need to know what I have done or said, or other people need to know what I've done or said, or I need to keep someone else accountable. So it's an extension of memory or kind of a means of accountability, okay? Then there's that second one. It's information or data created or received by an organization in the course of its activities. And that's usually where I camp out most often when I'm thinking about records today. In other words, number 2, a little better, maybe you can see that a little better. Number 2, kind of the illustration I use is your church does what it does and it leaves records in its wake. It just does you go do what you do, and as you do what you do, you create things that give evidence of that activity. Your church has a weekly service and you create a bulletin or an order of worship so that people walk in and they have this in their hand and they know what song to sing. So we're all singing the same song at the same time, which is helpful. It's a helpful thing to get us literally all on the same page. It also has announcements on the back, or it has who's in the nursery today, or when is the fellowship meal next week, who's in the hospital. It may have the sermon title or an inspirational quote or some data from last week's service. Our contribution was this much last week. Okay, that item is created in the course of your church just doing what you do. You did that last week, you'll do that next week, you'll do it again the week after, we think, we hope. It's not like you're it's not like your church exists to create orders of worship week in, week out. Your church gets together on a weekly basis, and as a result of that, there's some things that you leave behind you that give evidence of that thing you've done. So think along those lines about what it is your church does and the kinds of paper that could be digital now that you leave behind as you do what you do. So it may be your announcements that, we used to get bulletins in the mail. We used to mail out bulletins. And I think we realized we were spending a lot of money on that. But now there's email. So now you get, maybe your church does a daily email or a weekly email. Maybe they send the bulletin to you in PDF form where we used to get the thing in the mail. So this could be a digital item. Some churches have Facebook groups that are open or closed or subgroups. So, Sunday school class has got a Facebook group. And that serves to convey information that poses its own challenges for how we can extract the information from a closed Facebook group. So there's challenges with that, but same kind of dynamic. The church does what it does, and there are records that it leaves behind. So that's that number 2 kind of definition. Part 2 will be operative for me as we go through. Okay. Now I just talked about all of those, but that's a nice image of lots of kinds of records. Each one of these is a record. Your church probably has a ledger book, like that, tied up with string in the shoebox. It's got all the members listed. There's photography of many formats. I like this image because it gives you lots of texture to it. So there's an old cabinet card, there's some snapshots, there's some slides. You move an old daguerreotype in one of those old cases, one of those folding cases to protect it. You move up and you've got other kinds of photography. Maybe you've got negatives, and then in the microfilm reel, 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter, Super 8, VHS. Now we can get down in here to these various types of magnetic media, VHS, cassette tapes, or digital media of many kinds. Have you seen the joke about the 3.5 floppy that someone says they digitally or they've 3D printed the save icon? The kids who don't realize today that actually was a thing. We actually had an object we would put it in. It's not a 3D print of a save icon on your computer. It's actually an item that has information on it. And I probably would be safe in assuming none of us have computers that work that will read a 3x5 floppy. And even if we did, we may not have software that will open the file. And if we were able to open the file, we may not have a printer that we could print or the paper to put in the printer with you remember the printer, the holes on the side, and you pull those off, or ink in the printer. So there's all these kind of downstream complications that come when we have moved from a ledger book like this to putting our membership roster on a 3.5 floppy. Without getting into the good or the bad of it, it's just some downstream preservation questions. I mean, there's some downstream preservations of committing it to writing, in the sense that there is the one copy. And there is only the one copy, unless you handwrite another one or make a photocopy of it. I digress, but there's some various formats of cassette tapes, micro cassettes. Remember those little tiny micro cassette recorders? It's like beepers. You know, we remember them, but we've moved on and haven't thought about them once since. Well, you may have things in the closet at church that look a lot like this table. Maps, large prints, architectural drawings, blueprints, art. All of these are records in the sense that they're going to convey information. Okay. Here's another way to look at it. If you had to give evidence of what you've done at church or your congregation, what would you point to as evidence? And that's perhaps a helpful way to think about, what do I have or what could I look for that would help me understand the history of what we've done and who we've been and what we've thought to be important. If I had to give evidence of our activities, what would I submit as evidence? Let me use the Alabama Department of Archives and History online digital repository as a way to illustrate things. I went through your online repository, which is really neat. There's lots of things here. Scholars of religion on kind of one end of a spectrum, to local folks interested in local history on the other end of the spectrum will find something here. I thought it was really quite interesting. The images that I'll give you, I'll always put the URL so you can see the images. You can go there. Now you probably won't have time to write all this, but this PowerPoint will be available, so you can go back and find these later on. So this is the core, and I'm also using the descriptions that you've got on your Alabama Digital Repository. So this description is taken directly from the web page that you'd find if you click that link. Here's the quarterly conference record book for the Court Street Methodist Episcopal Church South in Montgomery. You may have something similar. What a great source of information. It will be challenging to decipher the handwriting, but it's rich with information, lots of names, lots of granular data about the doings of this church, the things that they were involved in. So right off the bat, you can see this is potentially very useful. Also, this is going to pose a challenge for reading the handwriting and deciphering the handwriting. Also, this will reflect the perspective of the person who's generating it. So that's something to consider, is who keeps these records, who creates these records, and for what purpose. So keep that in mind. This was an official document of the congregation, probably generated by an appointed clerk or secretary. I don't know exactly what language they would have used. And that would be helpful for you to keep in mind, to think about, well, why was this information recorded? Well, this information had a purpose, and there was a need that the person who generated it had, and this information served a purpose for them at that time. That's why they wrote what. Now, I don't know what that was or who that person was. Those are questions, again, that's generative questions that I would want to think about as I encounter membership ledgers, was who wrote this and why? Maybe when, especially as you get into them and you see the handwriting change, or you see Maybe this handwriting is consistent, but somewhere over in the margin, you've got a later addition. Well, why would they do that? Okay, that's a good question, but that's still a question that I would want to ask myself as I'm digging into these records. Very pregnant with possibilities about what we could do with this. We could reconstruct a membership roster. We could see just how many people were in this church. We could see how many men, how many women. Maybe we could understand, are they talking about heads of families? Maybe we could put that alongside census data and see, okay, if we got heads of families listed, we could then cross-reference and try to find those people in the census and see, well, how many actual people were in the family? Like, this was a church of 15 or 20 people, but it has grown over time. So maybe you've got extensive membership registers, and you can look at several census records, and you could chart the growth of your church over time. Okay. There's the session book of the Pisgah Presbyterian Church in Cahaba, Alabama. Am I pronouncing that right? Cahaba. Okay. Thank you. That's right. So the Presbyterians have got a session book. Looks very much like the other one. Okay. Handwriting looks like 1839. Looks like July the 6th, 1839. That's how it looks to me. Okay. Session met according to adjournment. Okay, it's going to be tricky. No matter what, it's going to be tricky to kind of go through and sift through. But looks like someone's very careful about documenting what's going on. Okay. How about the Liberty Baptist Church over in Lee County? They've got a book. And look at all of, again, very similar. This has got a great list of names. Names of members. And over in Nashville, there's the equivalent among Churches of Christ, because we don't have a session, we don't have a synod, we've got a local congregation, and they may or may not put together a directory. Maybe not, it depends. Well, that's Boscobel Street Church, turns into Shelby Avenue Church in East Nashville, Tennessee in the 1930s. They put out a directory. And so these types of things happen kind of across the spectrum. They take different forms, they contain different things, and so my observation here is your record book will reflect the local details. Yes, very close to the ground, what's going on the ground. We had a meeting on this day, we got together, and here's what we talked about at this meeting, and we've captured and documented and recorded it. Step back a bit, we also have a witness to something bigger than just what happened on the ground that day or that afternoon or that weekend when the session met or the synod met or the council met or the association met if you're in a Baptist context. It has something to say about the larger group, the parent group or the parent denomination. Among Churches of Christ, there is no parent group. So that right there is itself something, another layer of meaning, is we don't have a parent group. Formally, there is no body larger than the local congregation. Informally, there's networks of folks who keep in touch and operate and work and share in many things, but formally, there is none. Point being that I'd kind of like to observe that your polity, how it is you organize yourselves, whether the Methodist Conference or the Presbyterian Synod or the Baptist Association or among Churches of Christ, the informal networks around our schools and around our church papers, friendships and networks that are informal, That polity, how you organize yourself at a level different than your local church, impacts your preservation strategy. I'll kind of put a bookmark there. We'll come back to that. But how your church functions as one among others will impact what you preserve and how you preserve it. By that I mean, if you're a member, say it, I'll use an illustration from what I talked about at Faulkner yesterday. James Walton Shepherd grew up at Log Lick Christian Church down near Vienna, Kentucky. Log Lick Christian Church at one time was, at least it shared a building with the Log Lick Baptist Church. And I think that those two groups were actually one group until some Baptists in and around Winchester, Kentucky kind of embraced Alexander Campbell's reform ideas, and their fellow Baptists did not appreciate it. That's a short version to say there was a big fight on the ground in Clark County. All right. Log Lick, out in the country, little bitty church. Well, that little bitty church, kind of we'd say isolated in the middle of nowhere, was participating in a larger discourse in Baptist circles about lots of things. So when I'm looking and sifting records and trying to find things and save things, I may kind of back into a situation where I have now had this kind of research vista opened for me of looking up, as I was looking up the Shepherd family at Log Lick Christian Church. I was digging into Baptist Association minutes, not anticipating going there, but where it, as I got down the rabbit trail and was looking at things, I realized this Christian church grows out of a Baptist context. And I need to find out information about these folks, and I'm going to have to look at Baptist Association minutes from the 1810s, and they will tell me something about that church. And I found, thanks to the Kentucky archivist who scanned them and put them online, it was it was great. I was up till 2 a.m. reading Baptist Association minutes from Clark County, Kentucky, finding all sorts of things. That church was growing. It was one of the largest Baptist churches in the county. I was able to craft a narrative, and it's kind of got sparked by a discussion of church polity and kind of how the church functioned at a level bigger than just what happened on the ground there at Log Lick. I didn't expect to get there, but that's kind of where I got. Now, all of a sudden, if I were to be the archivist for that church, now I've got some Baptist Association minutes on my radar that could be useful to me. I'd want to save those. I'd want to find those. I'd want to look down that trail to discover some things. Didn't expect to look for them, but now that's become part of our history, so to speak, if I were to put myself in the position of that congregational historian. So you've got an ordination certificate here signed by Francis Asbury. What a neat thing. Look at that. Here is Humphrey Gilmore's ordination certificate signed by Francis Asbury. Hard to get, in the Methodist world, harder to get. Bigger than Francis Asbury over in Georgia in 1801. That's pretty neat. Sorry, just had to be said. That's pretty neat. Look at that. It's an ordination certificate signed by Francis Asbury. Fabulous. My Methodist friends over at SMU and Perkins would just salivate over this. They would love it. They have one on permanent display out in their display. They're very proud, justly proud of it. Among Churches of Christ, if we had something signed by Alexander Campbell, if there's an ordination certificate, I think the Disciples Historical Society has one, actually. Very proud of that. Okay, this source here, again, you're ordained to Christian ministry, and this paragraph says what you can do. Aha. Now I'm on to something, because this may, my particular Methodist congregation may not have anything to do with Humphrey Gilmore. But if we have roots that go back to the early part of the 19th century, way back to 1801, and we had an ordained minister here, I think it's safe to say that our ordained minister met the same qualifications that Humphrey did and received the same kind of certificate Humphrey did. And this little paragraph that, he is recommended to all whom it may concern as a proper person to administer the ordinance of baptism, marriage, and burial of the dead, and in the absence of an elder, to feed the flock of Christ, so long as his spirit and practice are such as becometh the gospel of Christ. I think it would be safe to say, if we had an ordained minister at my local Methodist church, even though we may not have anything to do with Humphrey Gilmore, and he was ordained, I could use this source of information to help me understand what our ordained minister would have done in that time. So here's a source that may on the surface have nothing to do with my church, but yet at a deeper level could be very illuminating for what ministry looks like for the people who served our church. So this Methodist ordination certificate could be really useful for that. Then you've got Stephen Gilmore. He was licensed to exhort, then to preach, and then he was given a certificate of ordination. So again, we're still within Methodist context, but if your Methodist church talks about having an exhorter, that's a technical term that means something within the context of your local denomination or your particular, so in other words, the polity of your group impacts what happens on the ground at your church. So you're going to kind of have to become familiar with that language. What does an exhorter do? What does someone who's licensed to preach? It looks like exhortation, preaching, and full ordination are different things, as they were different things. And these really are useful to help shed light on what those various roles looked like. And looks like it's the progression from exhortation to preaching to full-on ordination. What about the certificate of dismissal issued by the United Baptist Church of Christ or Town Church in Yalobusha County? I don't know if anyone here from Mississippi can correct me on that. What's it mean to leave that church and go move elsewhere? Someone was very concerned that when one of our own leaves, they leave with our recommendation. And you may have characters in your family tree like, well, they may have moved and didn't get a recommendation. Okay. We all have those characters in our family tree. So you may go through the roles and find people excommunicated for various reasons, withdrawn from for various reasons. Okay. There's the flip side of doing your genealogies. You never know what you're going to find. But for the purpose of the record keeping, it tells me someone was very concerned about keeping up with people. A membership meant something for this group. Having the documentation that you could then produce when you move shows when we left home and moved out here, we left in good standing. And when we show up and present this letter to the new church can feel confident. Even though we're strangers, they can feel confident in us. That tells me something about kind of the ethos on the ground at this congregation way over in Yalobusha County. Fascinating. They're in good standing, and we recommend them to you. So says William Duke, the clerk. So here's enough an officer of the congregation. It's an official document, kind of bears the authority of the leaders of the congregation, says, yes, we send you on your way. Here's a printed, published sermon. This was from First Presbyterian Church in Wetumpka. I thought that was appropriate. A discourse on Christian patriotism. 4th of July, 1848. This gives us a window into the teaching on the ground at that church. It also tells me this was intended for wider circulation. This was intended for the folks who left and the folks who received them when they ever got to where they were going. Very private and really doesn't have any utility beyond that, at least in the moment. We send you on your way with our best wishes and a church letter. Safe travels. Okay. This was published. Now, there may only be 2 copies that survive or 1,000 copies. We don't know how many were printed, but this was intended for public use. So as you go through the closet at church and you find printed sermons. Maybe your church printed the sermon and distributed it. Maybe they mailed it. Maybe they had a newsletter that was published. That's public facing. So in my mind, that raises the question of who produced that and why and for what purpose was that record produced. That gives me some clues about what kind of story it tells for the church. I did that last night. I ran through, I got to hitting the button, and next thing you know, I was 4 slides ahead. Some records were originally private, some semi-private, some public or published. Some of them may be in private hands, therefore. For example, that membership transferal document. That wouldn't be something you'd have at church, possibly. That's something someone may have in the shoebox at home. So now we're thinking about finding and locating and preserving things, and we're looking for them in private hands, not necessarily in institutional hands or organizational hands. May not be something at a church building. It's in the closet from the descendants of these folks. It's a great picture from Birmingham, and it shows you, 1, how small the place is, and 2, it shows you all the churches. Looks like, maybe, I don't know how many churches were in Birmingham at this time, but we get at least the Presbyterian, Baptist, and Methodist church all in the same picture. And as I got to thinking about this, it struck me from my own interest in Nashville Churches of Christ. I've desperately tried to find photographs of some of those churches, many of them long closed, no surviving photographs. I would love to have a photograph. And as I got to thinking, there's number 1. So there's the Presbyterian church, kind of right, that's the roof of it. If we had another picture that we weren't sure about what that was, and I could compare it with the roof line and the chimneys here, I may be able to prove or disprove that what I don't know is or is not the First Presbyterian Church. Number 2, over here, there's the Baptist Church. And the Methodist Church, number 3, looks like it's over here. Looks like I don't know what's going on with that. Okay. This is, if I were at any of those 3 churches, well, yes, this shows me my church. But if I'm at either of the other 2, this source helps me identify or has something that's useful for me at my church, even though, I'm a member at Presbyterian Church, but it shows the Methodist Church. In other words, if I were to go back and find other photographs of early Birmingham, of the Methodist Church or the Baptist Church, it may be that off in the distance, in the background, there's my church. I found some pictures of some things on the ground in Nashville, indirectly because they were in the background or adjacent to other things. And it was the other thing that was the focus of the photograph. But off in the background, I was able to say, There's the Foster Street Church. Right there it is. It's grainy and it's fuzzy, but I can make it out. Or there's the South College Street Church. Finally, I know what shape of building I'm looking for. And I was able to find, it was from an aerial view of Nashville. And off in the distance, I knew the intersection and I knew what corner of the intersection it was on because I looked at atlases, but there I could see the roof line. And I was able to rule out a Nazarene church. That's not it. I thought that may have been it. I was able to rule it out based on the roof line. Now, I've gone way down in the weeds there, but I was so excited because I could not, for the life of me, find any photograph of the South College Street Church or the Foster Street Church. Aerial photos of the city of Nashville, taken for other reasons by other people, happened to capture my church in the background. That was very useful. So this kind of source could be very useful. A group shot such as this, well, I don't know if this is all of this church. I don't know if this is just one of many Sunday school classes. But it shows me, relatively speaking, how many kids were there. Now, I know maybe they weren't there week in, week out. Maybe this was a special event. All kinds of questions. But look at all those kids. I don't know how they got them to sit still, but look at all those kids, and they're all dressed up. This guy's just having a great time. He's just happy to be there. It's just a sweet photograph. So there's that layer. I also see kind of the relative number of kids and adults. There's a lot of kids at the Trinity Presbyterian Church in Montgomery. I don't know, is this a special event? Is this one class and there were 10 others? Maybe this was all. When was this taken? Was this a new building? Was this a dedication? Was this Easter? Was this, what's going on? Again, all kinds of questions. Maybe this is the only photograph we have from that time period. And so that alone is because it's the onlyest one that I've got. Therefore, it's going to be useful for me. Again, it raises some questions. Here's a church that has a beautiful brick building, beautiful stained glass. They're all standing out in front. Again, is this a dedication? Is this a special event? We can see, if we look close, we can kind of estimate the number of people there. Maybe this is not everyone, but maybe we can estimate how many people were there at this point in time. We can see how many men, how many women, how many children. Maybe there's descendants of folks in your church, and they could then point out and give you names and put names with faces, and I help identify some of these folks. There's Foster Street Church in Nashville. Dinner on the ground at Foster Street at a park in East Nashville. They went to the park on a Sunday afternoon. They had dinner on the ground. There's my research interest, J.W. Shepard. He's standing there. There's Paul Miller, who was one of the elders at the church, longtime leader at the church. And everyone's brought their food, and they're all having a great time. Some of them don't look like it, but they're having a great time, all right? Some of them look they're very serious, posing for the photograph, okay? They didn't take 1,000 pictures of themselves every day like we do. So, got to pose very, It's one moment of what happened when this church got together, and I suspect there was more dinner on the grounds than just the one, but it shows me a moment in time of what it's like to be a member. Just a glimpse, but what it's like to be a member. They're all sitting very close. They're all eating together. They're having a meal. There are a few of them look like they're happy in the back. They're smiling. Okay. I don't know who James Hugh Blair Hall is, but he evidently teaches a school, an academy at the Rosedale Cumberland Presbyterian Church. All of a sudden, again, this raises new questions. Why were they teaching a school? Was it a church-sponsored school? Did they just use the building? Because churches have spaces that aren't used during the week, and we can use the space at the church to teach the school. All kinds of questions. I may, if I were to get a hold of a history of education in Jefferson County, Alabama, I might find references to this school that would help me understand the church. Maybe it was a church-sponsored school. Seems reasonable, given that Reverend Hugh Blair Hall is somehow in charge. Teacher, perhaps, likely superintendent. Not a whole lot of kids there. Maybe that's a substitute for the public. Maybe that's a private academy in addition to the public schools of Jefferson County, Alabama. So if I were researching this congregation and I found out that there's a school there, now I've got, well, what does education in Jefferson County look like? So there's a whole new kind of vista of research that's open to me because we stumbled across a photograph and it's the Zelosophian Academy at the church. And I didn't realize we had an academy, Zelosophian or not, at church, and we do. And so now we've opened up a new research avenue. There's a great shot of the Sunday school in action at the CME church, and this did not have a location. Just a few kids. Looks like there's the leader. I don't know if this is an assistant. I don't know if there's people behind us. We're just close to the front. There may not be much in the way of paper trails for knowing what we taught at Sunday school, but I think they're singing. He looks like he's singing. He may have a songbook open in front of him. That may be a lesson book. It's probably a songbook. And I've lately gotten very interested in hymnody as a way to help us understand ourselves. So we may not have a paper trail to go on, but this photograph suggests to me, I can see they're singing. And they're gathered around, they're singing to each other, they're singing together. If I could figure out what songbook they had, I could then spend an afternoon looking through the songbook and seeing what kind of songs were in the hymnal that the Sunday school kids at the CME church used. So what does their religious training look like? Well, I don't know the whole picture, but I know they were singing. This photograph shows them singing. What songs did they sing? What did they have in that book? I don't know that we've thought about that use of a hymnal before, but that's a way to use a hymnal to help tell the story about this church and its Sunday school. That's a great picture. And Louis Armstrong. It looks like this visitation program was a well-oiled machine. Look at that. Very organized, very methodical. Maybe there's other information about this visitation ministry at this is the Morning View Baptist Church here in Montgomery. Maybe there's other information that tells me more about what that visitation looked like, but it looks like, is he in charge? It looks like he may be in charge. It looks like it's very well thought out, very carefully done, very methodically done. This looks like it was a very important part of that church's life. So if you were a member at Morning View Baptist, I suspect you were either making visits or getting visits from other people in the church. And it looks like it was kind of organized according to age, nursery. Looked like they all had 6 nursery slots. Look like a lot of babies. Beginners, primary, junior, intermediate, young people, and a couple of adults. And I guess these are lists or number. I don't know how this all works. But just from the photograph, I've got some clues or some avenues to look down. It may inform my preservation strategy that I can start digging around and saying, what is it about that visitation program? What survives from that? Or now I've got a potential question that I can ask in an oral history interview. Were you involved in visitation? What did you do? Tell us a story about visitation. You didn't even know to ask the question, but now that you've seen this photograph with a very carefully done board, suggests maybe there's something there to ask about. Or if we can go back and say, do you remember singing? Do you remember singing at Sunday school? What songs did you sing? So a church's favorite songs will tell you something about them. Okay, that's kind of the upshot there. If you have a long-time minister, I don't know how long Rabbi Grafman was with the synagogue. He has a portrait. You may have a long-time minister that you've honored, a highly respected minister who served the church for a long time, and there's something special done for that person. Okay, here's unveiling of the portrait, Rabbi Milton Grafman with Mrs. Frank Wise and her daughter Susan at the unveiling of his portrait at Temple Emmanuel on Highland Avenue in Birmingham. Is there something about your minister, something about your leaders that's important? Or it was at one, again, I don't have a date here handy. Looks like 1960s to me. That's 50 years ago or more. Okay. It may be you had a longtime minister a long time ago, and what was very important to a generation before ours has faded in time, and that is not as vivid now as it was then. So you may find portraits like this in the closet. I have found dedication plaques. People have given us dedication plaques, which it was very important in the moment. And they renovated and took the dedication plaque off because we're going to do something. It's totally understandable. Well, are you going to save the portrait? Are you going to save the dedication plaque? Do we really need all of these? Again, downstream questions. This has happened too. Maybe you find the portrait in the closet and there's no name attached to it. And we all are scratching our heads saying, who is this person? Should we throw this away? Should we keep it? None of us know who this person is. There's this unidentified picture and it's this big and we don't know what to do with it. Again, maybe that puts a plug in for writing the name of the person on the back of the portrait. I suspect here at Temple Emmanuel, they probably had a plaque to go with that, so we know who this is, but there may be other questions. Okay, what's the observation? Photography can give us details and nuance that we might otherwise miss. Maybe it will prompt questions we may not otherwise ask. Think for a moment about your church architecture. There's some great pictures here. Just go through a little rural church somewhere in Tuscaloosa County. That's the outside. There's the inside. We've all driven by these churches in the country. I'm always tempted to stop and get out and look. We never have time to do that. Look at the way that the seating is arranged. It may have been a primitive Baptist church. If you've done Sacred Harp singings and you sing in that kind of square facing each other, this type of seating will look familiar to you. Doesn't look very comfortable, but it's functional. It works. It gets the job done. So this type of architecture tells me maybe they built it themselves. Maybe someone had the land, maybe someone else had the lumber, maybe still someone else had the sawmill, and between the three of them, we can get a church up. And that works, okay? That tells us something about the folks who built this church, okay? St. Peter's is a very different space. Very different space. Could not be differenter than this, from that to this. The space helps me understand the people who worship in it. So it may be that you don't have a lot of information about what happened at church, but you got a picture of the building? That may tell you something about the people who worship there. Or St. John's Episcopal. That tells me something. The style, the Gothic ecclesiastical style tells me something. Again, I may have little else to go on except the style of building, but that could be useful to me. What a great shot. The interior of the Methodist Church in Birmingham. That's impressive. It's hard to miss the organ. It's hard to miss the pulpit and stage area. It's the focal point. It is the actual visual focal point. There's ornamentation here. You don't really need it. You know, there's no structural need for it, but there's an aesthetic need for it. So say the folks who built this church. So that's what they did. Okay. Quite impressive space. Very different. Here's the pulpit area from the Ebenezer Presbyterian Church in Clinton. I suspect this is out in the country too. Looks abandoned. Looks like it's been abandoned for a long time. Presbyterian church, not a lot of ornamentation. Rather plain, the pulpit is the focus here, just like the pulpit is the focus here. But I'm struck by how different that focus is for these Presbyterians here versus the Methodist and down in the city. Very austere, very stark. Not a lot of ornamentation. Maybe we could say that the moldings here, again in a classical style, maybe that's some ornament, but that's not much. That's if you were standing in the pulpit and looking up. Not a lot. White paint or some type of neutral color paint. Pews that you can sit on, that's what we need. Okay, that's Presbyterian Church in Clinton. Here's the Presbyterian Church in Montgomery. Both Presbyterian churches, very, very different. I suspect this is later than the other one. So if your church first built a little frame building out in the country and then moved into town and built a Gothic revival with stained glass windows, that tells me something just about the way that the space was constructed and used. If your church had a kitchen, that tells me something, or a recreational space, or fellowship space, or nursery space, or classroom spaces. That tells me something about the activities that were going on. And I don't know how many churches had kitchens in the 1950s. I think this was 1950s. St. John's Episcopal in Montgomery did. Here it is. Looks like they appreciate having coffee around Sunday school. So there's a couple various different ways we can make coffee. Well, we feed each other. We eat together. Okay, we teach our children. We have spaces for this or spaces for that. So what are those spaces? Again, generative here for gathering and preserving. The hymnals, I've already mentioned that. The hymnals are a witness to what we believe and teach and think and how we've been formed. So there's a picture of folks singing. It's on VJ Day, but they're singing. There may be little to go on, except we've got a copy of the hymnal. Or maybe you don't have a copy of the hymnal at your church, but you know, most little primitive Baptist churches out in the country tended to sing from this book. So maybe some research in Baptist hymnody could be useful for how you could kind of reconstruct that story. Or we were at a Presbyterian church out in rural Tuscaloosa County. We were probably singing Isaac Watts, or we may have been singing from the Psalms. So we could find some of those hymnals elsewhere. Okay, observation, the built environment tells us something. If it changed over time, that tells us something. Then I want to ask who made those decisions and why. That may tell me something. Shift gears a bit. Here's a page from the Montgomery Methodist, Volume 1, number 12. I don't know if this was just by that one Methodist church or if it was on behalf of all Methodist churches in the city or the area. But there's a source of information. I don't know who it is who's gathering information on Baptist churches in Alabama, but the Bassett's Creek Church in Fulton and the Beulah Church in Albertville filled it out and responded. And how I wish someone in Nashville, Tennessee would have done this for Churches of Christ. I keep hoping at some time, maybe I'll stumble on a cache of these. If you're into Baptist history, there's a lot of these, and it's really quite fascinating. Someone from the church has filled out information. I don't know this originated from within any one church, but it's got lots of churches in its view, just like the Montgomery Methodist. It may be just that paper from just that church. It may be all the city, all the churches in the city, all the Methodist churches in the city kind of have a little forum of news and information and encouragement and teaching. The church papers, the church periodicals. I suspect in the Methodist churches, it's going to be probably the Alabama Christian Advocate or the Alabama Baptist Standard or some type of forum for news and information. You definitely want to go look for those. Was there some type of organization among your church or among your group that churches partnered with or supported? For example, as you look in your treasurer's report and you see a line that says, $10 to the Mercy Home. You're like, well, what's the Mercy Home? Well, here's the annual reports, the 23rd one of the Mercy Home for 1914. It's the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WIC2 of Birmingham. If our church is supporting that and sending checks there, that might tell me something about what we think is important. It's a mission effort. It's a benevolent ministry. It's some type of charity. It's some type of, I don't know what they do at the Mercy Home. The report probably would tell me. But if I find an entry in my financial ledger that says $10 to Mercy Home and it's every month for several years, I want to go kind of sniff around Mercy Home and see what's going on there that we wanted to join with them and support. You may not have any of this at church. You know, it may be we just sent the check and we don't have literature in our closet at church. You may stumble upon that, and that opens an avenue for research. It may be that someone's writing book-length regional histories. As I was working on some of what I was presenting at Faulkner, I used these 3 books about Alabama Churches of Christ. And all 3 of them, Asa Plyler's book here, Dabney Phillips in the middle, and this book about Christian churches in Alabama are all from within the Disciples or Churches of Christ. And they are each from different perspectives within that group, believe it or not. So I have 3 different groups within Churches of Christ or Christian churches represented by 3 books here. Each one of them has its own focus and omits other information that they think is irrelevant for their purpose at hand. Asa Plyler does not mention some churches that Dabney Phillips does. The Christian churches here pretty much don't have much at all to say about any of the other Churches of Christ because they're focused on Christian churches and disciples. So even those kinds of sources have their own perspectives and objectives and can shed light in their own way. But I've got to kind of learn that inner logic and sift through them. It can be challenging, and you can be pardoned if it feels daunting. But it's a research vista that kind of opens up to think about the bigger story. What a great picture. This is wonderful. This may be like, I feel like that's me. Okay, that's me at church when I open that closet. Okay, what a great picture. Oh, look at that. What is that? Okay, this is Solomon Schichter, and he's working on the contents of the Cairo Geniza. And you said, bless you. No, the Cairo Geniza. What? Okay, you all have one of these at church. It's the closet where you keep all the things. Or behind, you know, where there's a pulpit and there's a little door behind the pulpit here. They've got one here. I bet if I were to open this door, there'd be all kinds of papers under there where we just kind of stuff things where we don't know what else to do with them. We could just as easily throw them away, but it gets shoved off in the closet. Maybe it's the back of the church library. It's a filing cabinet. It's a closet. It's in the basement. It's in the attic. It's in the church office, wherever it is. It's that unsorted mass of things. Well, there was a synagogue in Cairo, and what they would do with the scrolls as they were worn out is they would put them in the Geniza. What's a Geniza? Like a closet, a cupboard. It's a place you stuff things where you don't use them, but you don't want to get rid of them. The Geniza. Upshot being, it's a fabulous trove of biblical manuscripts was discovered when they dug into the Geniza at Cairo, the Cairo synagogue. They opened up, they found, look at all of these manuscripts. It's amazing. And there's Solomon Schichter trying to kind of put Humpty back together again with all these wonderful fragments from the Cairo Geniza. And there we all are too, right? With our own contents of our own Geniza, or I guess it'd be Genizot, of our own document caches, trying to put things back together. Okay, I have a handout. I hope you got one as you came in. I tried to give you lots of information. What I've tried to do, both here on the handout and in this next section of the presentation, is kind of think through some more practicality. So it's with all of this was kind of gathering and preserving, generative, kind of food for thought, get our thoughts going here. How are we doing on time, by the way? I don't want to go too long.
15 minutes.
Okay, I think we'll be fine. A preservation policy is always, I think, a great place to start. In other words, I think if you're going to try this, it's in your best interest and everyone's best interest to do this with official sanction from your church. You could go rogue. Your church may be small enough where you don't need official sanction. It may be that you are the person who's holding your church together and you make decisions anyway. And if no one else is going to do it and you do it, everyone else is just pleased that you're going to do it anyway. And this is red tape that's unnecessary. Okay, what I'm trying to say is it may be really useful to have the people on board who need to be on board to support you. Because it may be in the written record or it may be in the unwritten record. Because you may discover things that you didn't know were there. And there's a reason why we don't talk about them. Because we're groups of human beings and other human beings do things that we're not proud of and we don't want to remember. So there's always the possibility that as you start digging into the history and digging into the past, you may find stories, and we now know why we don't talk about that. Okay? There may be sensitive areas. There may be memories that we'd rather not remember. Okay? There may be questions that you don't know that you shouldn't ask that person about that. Okay? You may or may not know all of that. And the official leaders, or those who are in charge, or the unofficial leaders who actually make decisions, would be good to have conversations with them about this project of going forward with preserving history. It may be that you could avoid landmines, or at least know where they are. The more time passes, the easier it is to deal with that. But sometimes if it's fresh, or if the people who are involved are still around, kind of digging into the history may be an unwelcome gesture. They may not feel as positive and warm as we do about kind of seeing a picture of Sunday school kids and kind of feeling very hopeful about what that could teach us about the church. They could say, why are you asking all these questions? You need to mind your own business, okay? You may need to preserve things or not, depending on some legal needs. There may be a legal need to preserve records. It may be duly diligent that you should be saving some things that you're not. Maybe you're not keeping personnel files, and you should. If you're thinking about making a change in leadership, or you're thinking about doing that and you have no personnel files, there could be legal ramifications. There may not be. It could depend, okay? Point being is the stakeholder investment, goodwill, collaboration is always helpful. And it's also helpful that a preservation policy will help define your scope. Just what are we trying to do here versus what will we not do? Okay, manage expectations. The next thing here, I've got control. Kind of what we say at work is we've got one job. We need to know what we've got. We need to know where it is. That's all we need to do. Now, I know there's more that we need to do, but if we just do that one thing, we will have done our job. We need to know what we've got. We need to know where it is. People come and they say, I would love to see X. Do you have anything like that? We need to be able to say, or discover, we may not know on the spot, right? Yeah, I think we've got some things about X. Let me look and see what let me look at our finding aids. Let me look at our online catalog. Maybe just from memory, let me dig around and look in this book and look in that collection. Maybe here, or maybe there. I think we've got something about X. Okay, where is it? Well, if it's a book and it's cataloged, the Dewey Decimal Number will tell us the shelf location. It's repeatable. It's scalable. I can add 10,000 more books using the same system, shelve them correctly. As long as I can do A's and B's and 1s and 2s and put them in numerical order and alphabetical order, I can get to that book. It's beautiful. And I can take that book out and use it and put it back. If I don't put it back in the right place, I've lost physical control. It could be anywhere. I may as well throw it away if I don't have physical control. Like, well, it's back there somewhere. And at 5,000 square feet, it's back there somewhere. Okay, it's safe, right? It's so safe I can't find it. It's back there somewhere. You know, people say, what do you have in your archive at church? Like, well, we've got lots of old things. Tell me more about it. I have no idea. It's a lot of old things. It's a Genisa. What do you expect? Okay, well, you don't have intellectual control over it. In other words, you don't know what you have. Or if you're like me, you're like, oh, yes, I know that picture. It's got to be around here somewhere. All right, intellectual control is firing on all cylinders. Physical control, I don't know where it is. It's in that stack somewhere. Well, it means you're going to have to go through that stack, which is fine once or twice. But by the 10th or 11th or 12th or 115th time, going through that stack without any type of physical control is not just old, it's counterproductive because now it's truly not useful for you. So really, the next thing, after kind of getting some policy in place and setting some parameters and getting people on board that need to be on board and selling your idea and garnering trust, is kind of being able to know what you've got and knowing what it's about. So gaining intellectual control over it, or aboutness, and then knowing where it is, that is location and storage. It sounds trite. That's all you have to do. You just need to know what you have and where it is. Easier said than done, I know, but that's the essence of it. The order. The order. The order is always important. You know, I mentioned those record books. It would be, if I had lots of record books, it would be and that the clerks of the church have always kept them in sequence. I need to maintain that sequence. If your minister, let's assume longtime minister, leaves his sermons, all his papers to the church, beloved minister, we love this minister, he served us, preached for us week in, week out, we've left all of his sermons, and he happened to preach on topics. Here a topic, there a topic. You never know what it's going to be from week to week, but it's always a topical sermon. And he may reuse those sermons. So a sermon note or sermon outline or manuscript on faith could be reused. If it's good to preach once, it'll preach again. Okay, and he files them in alphabetical order by the topic. F for faith comes before L for love. You see how that would go. It would be a mistake if we were to take that box full of sermon notes and rearrange them in chronological order. If we knew the chronology, sometimes preachers will put that date, preached here in February of 77, and then I went on the road and preached it again somewhere else in March of 78. That way, if I ever go back to that place again, I know I don't preach that sermon on faith again too soon because they've already heard it. Right? Wait 10 years, I can go back and preach it again. Okay, it'd be a mistake to reconstruct those in chronological order because his way of thinking was in topical order by faith, by subject. Not that the chronological order is bad, it's just not reflective of how he created those records. And the way he created those records tells me how he used them in a way that the records themselves can't speak. In other words, the order and arrangement of the records can tell me something that the items themselves don't. The order and sequence of the sermons by topic reveals how this minister thought and conducted his preaching. If I were to reconstruct those in some other way, I would lose that little bit of testimony. Okay. You may also have a Geniza full of paper and there is no order at all, and you're going to have to impose order. That is, you're going to have to get this pile of paper in shape. Don't feel bad about doing it. Chaos is never going to help you. If you can preserve the original order, fine. If there's not any, or you just cannot crack the nut and it's just not going to emerge for you, impose an order and move on, and don't worry about it. Because otherwise it's going to be that sifting through the stack time after time after time after time. It's just not going to be useful. Observation, or the next one here, downstream practicalities, or what have I got myself into? As you think about starting down this road, where are you going to store all of this? And how are you going to keep it and scale it up if people find out and start cleaning out their closets too? Okay, it's a great problem to have when you start to, hey, we're going to start an archive at church, and if you've got bulletins and if you've got photographs and special things, we'd love to preserve them. Please don't throw them away. Longtime members pass away, and we're going to have an estate sale, and Brother Smith was a deacon forever, and he's got all the deacon minutes. Would the church like them? Yes, we'd love to have them. And it catches on and people know that you want to save it. And they start giving you things. How are you going to manage? That needs some thought. Who's going to, are we going to do the acid-free folders? Or are we just not? Acid-free folders are expensive. That's the thing, kind of the standard. I'd rather have cheaper folders than no folders. I'd rather have acid-free than cheap folders, but I'd rather have some folders than none. I'd rather just have a box rather than nothing. Are you going to use archival supplies? I've put links on the handout for places to go to get them. That's expensive. Once you start looking around, you'll see, I don't know if we can afford this. Okay. Well, that's a consideration. Maybe that doesn't forestall everything, but that's a consideration. Maybe you've got a donor at church that says, we need to do this right, and I didn't realize acid-free folders and boxes are going to cost this much. But if we're going to do it right, then I'll be happy to give to that. Okay, I didn't realize it was going to be $5,000, but I'll do that. Okay. How are we going to continue? Because you love it and you're here at the seminar and you're invested in it. And who's going to be after you? Or who can pick up when you leave off, if you have to leave off? Or is this going to be a committee? Are we going to do a group of people? You're going to be the only person? Okay, how does this work? How will the committee function? Is there anyone in charge? Does anyone have the authority to say, yes, we'll keep that? No, we won't. Will that have to go through the committee? Will we have to be a unanimous approval? Will you have the authority to do that? Is leadership going to veto your decision down the road? Let's manage expectations. And they say, I didn't realize this was going to be a closet full of things. We can't do a closet. Sorry, we've started this, and then you get a year into it, you're like, I'm sorry, we can't do this. Or it's like, you have this in a closet? We don't need a closet. Let's build some display cabinets and put them in this other room that we could use. We didn't realize, it could go positive as well as kind of, we didn't realize this was going to take up so much space. It could be, this is fabulous. Let's build you a space. Let's refurbish the church library and make a historical room or something like that. Your policy will help you weed. If you realize we've got more bulletins than we need, I'm going to fall off that stage before now. We've got more bulletins than we can't keep any more bulletins. And it's hard to say no to that. But if you just do not have space and you cannot keep them all, and you already have a run of bulletins, and people start cleaning out the closets and it's special to them, therefore it must be special to you. Please keep our bulletins because they were sentimental for us. And your policy says we only keep 1 or 2 copies. We cannot keep any more than that. But these were mine. These were Dad's, and he was a deacon. You know how that conversation goes. I'm sorry, but our policy says we just don't have space. We can't do that. So you're not always the bad guy. Your policy can help you when it comes time to say no, when you need to say no. We could do a whole nother seminar on digitization. Oh my, what are we going to do with digitization when we say, well, let's just scan it all? Okay, that's a great impulse. And downstream, there are some real concerns about that. What are we going to do? There's some practicality that I can only raise the concern, and I hesitate to say any more than that. Accessibility. Intellectual and physical control is the basis for your accessibility. You've got to know what it is and where it is, aboutness and location, in order to give people access to it. Intellectual access or physical access. When people say, do we have any membership registers? Do we have record of baptisms? I say, yeah, actually, yes. Where? In the filing cabinet in drawer 1. Because you've made a list of the contents of the filing cabinet, drawer 1, membership registers. And maybe you have that list or finding aid or box list, or maybe you put it in database, or maybe you put it in Excel, however you do it. That's your entry point. So your accessibility grows out of your arrangement, and your description grows out of your intellectual and physical control. If it's chaos, physically or intellectually, it will likewise be chaos trying to find anything and getting access to it. We could do seminars on how to for all of these. There's lots more that could be done. Getting a policy, I knew there was a typo. You go over this 10 times and you still find, I'm embarrassed now, getting a policy in place might be your easiest first step. The energy and excitement, we're committed. Yes, it doesn't have to be perfect. It won't be perfect, so don't expect it to be perfect. You can always reserve the right to update your policy. In fact, it'd be good for you to say, we'll review this policy every 3 years or 5 years or however long you need it to be. That's fine. Get started. Getting it arranged and getting it described might be challenging. Good arrangement and description might pose your biggest challenges. And then I say, well, what is good? That's a question. That's a good question. Something is better than nothing. And starting with a Geniza that is chaotic and getting it in some type of order is a great first start. You can always improve description. So as what we've adopted at work is a minimal processing model, which is widely used across archives, which is we do a little bit of arrangement for everything. as opposed to great in-depth arrangement and description in just one collection, and then everything else kind of has to wait in line until we do the next fabulous arrangement and description on the next collection. Meanwhile, everything else is still backing up, and no one even knows we have it. What we've decided is we'll give some type of attention to everything at the point of receipt. So we'll know we have it. We know very broadly what's in it and where it is. Everything gets a name and a number and a location, and there's some type of access to everything almost from the beginning of when we receive it. We can always go back and improve. So I would say anything is better than nothing, and good is kind of like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Accessibility can mean many things. At one level, if you need to see it and you can see it, that's a win. Okay. The question is who needs to see it? You spell that out in your policy. How can they use it? Can people take things home? Maybe not. Probably not. You need to spell that out in your policy. Who can use it and why and how? Maybe it's that kind of traditional historical analysis and then putting it in a hard copy, church history in a book form. Maybe you do print on demand. Maybe you put it directly on the web. I was very recently, someone did a church history and they published it directly to the web. It's PDF form on a website. They can update it continually. It's going to be really quite useful. Anyone in the world can see it. Digitization and conversion, web-based publishing, digital archiving, all kinds of doors of possibilities, all kinds of challenges. Maybe there's some type of event, homecoming, anniversary. Maybe there's just some way you can get the generations together to hear stories and talk about them. That's one way to make this accessible. I'll put this online on my blog. I also wanted to show you this handout. I'll also put that online so you can get that. What I try to do here is just give you lots more information. I got the link to the Dictionary of Archives terminology, and then a couple of other helpful archival kind of things. I think these were helpful. I find them helpful, and I thought maybe you would find them helpful. The Gaylord and Hollinger are the places to go for archival supplies. You've got links there, and then about 3 books. Now, you may not be from Churches of Christ or Christian churches, but that last one, don't let the title kind of scare you away, because you may think, well, that's more specific to Churches of Christ than I need. But look at how Anthony Dunham structures his book. I think it's super helpful. One, he's kind of thinking about backgrounds for portraits. So think about someone your church is in the foreground, and then what's in the background? I thought this was so helpful. Way out at the horizon line, Anthony has a chapter, Christian View of History. So when we think about doing history as Christians, again, he's Christian, so if you're coming this from a Judeo-Christian perspective, you'll probably have some similarities. What's our view of history? That's the upshot. Then, at the middle distance, somewhere closer, not way out at the horizon, a little bit closer, Christianity in the United States. In other words, our church has a context. One, convictions kind of about the Christian view of history, and then move a little closer. Our church has a context for Christianity in the U.S. Now, up close, the Stone Campbell movement, our tradition. For you, it may be the Methodist movement, Baptist in the South. It could be various other traditions, but real close to your subject is the next kind of layer of context. I thought that was helpful. Then his chapter 4, some whys and hows of doing your congregational portraiture. I thought that's useful. I wanted to put that on the list. Then the next page, I've tried to address common questions of, I've got this, should we keep it or not? Okay, and what this page is basically kind of broken down into types of things you probably almost always ought to say yes to versus things you might need to say no to, and then some things we need to talk about. The yes list is long. I tend to be a saver. So the save list is going to be long. You can see I'll try to wring every bit of information out of any source as much as I possibly can because I've run into so many dead ends in so many congregations, especially in Nashville. There's just so little that survives. Anything that can help me understand, I'm going to latch onto it. So that's what I've tried to do there. Then types of materials which rarely merit long-term preservation. That's the bills, the local bills, the canceled checks, the vendor agreements. Check with your accountant or whoever is your finance person about how long you need to save these. Don't take my advice. You need to consult with them. You also need to, whoever your church has on retainer for legal matters, you need to bring their voice into the conversation, especially about privacy for personnel files. That's just duly diligent in handling people's privacy. There may be some things you don't need to save. There may be some things you should not save for liability reasons. What that might be, I can't, I dare not even speak. Then the duplicates. Maybe you just decide we're not going to keep duplicates. Therefore, policy says no, therefore we don't. Okay, and then my disclaimer, all right, seek the advice of the people who have expertise and actual responsibility for making decisions. I'd hate to either keep or throw away something that leadership says we don't keep that. Maybe you don't like the reason why, but they say no, therefore we need to talk. Okay, then there's that types of materials we need to talk about. And that's just, again, a generative list. There could be many more that we could talk or add to about things we need to have a conversation about. And it depends on your church. Then the special challenges. I hesitated to put accession records and control files in here. I didn't want to get too technical. Do you want to keep records of the things you get when people want to clean out their closets? Is that really a step that's necessary? Maybe, maybe not. Archives keep records of their incoming accessions, an accession record. Again, it's part of keeping intellectual and physical control in good order. So we will keep up. We will always know who gives what when, and we'll put a number on it, an accession number. So that accession number 2024.00, I did a sample one. Main Street Church in Montgomery just created a church and created a congregational archive and decided, let's do a simple accession record. 2024.001. That's the first accession in calendar year 2024. If you get more than 999 accessions in your church, then you may want to go with a 4-digit number. Bless your heart if that happens. I am so sorry that you've got 1,000 things to do. May feel like 1,000. Okay. In that accession, we get 3 directories. That way, if someone says, what did my father give you years ago? You could pull out the accession record and you say, he gave us 3 directories. Okay. You may write on the directory in a soft pencil on the back, 2024.001. That way we know exactly which one came from John Smith. That may be prudent. It may be helpful. Again, when you go to museums and you'll see maybe a very indiscreet spot, nondescript spot, not indiscreet, nondescript spot, they'll have maybe a little brush of white paint and a museum accession number. That's just them keeping track. All that is. You may not need to do that. I thought, well, it's a handout. Maybe you could take that and use that for what it's worth. That may be more trouble than you're interested in getting yourself into. That's okay too. Just don't do that. Okay. There may be other ways that you'd prefer to handle that. That's the handout. John, I don't know how we're doing on time. Probably over.
Yeah, we're a little over.
Probably over.
Scotty has a microphone. We have time for a couple of things.
I'd be happy to do that. I didn't mean to go absolutely to the time, but if I'd be happy to answer questions. So.
Also good to point out for our online audience that if you have a question, you can post that in the chat feature. We can see that. While we're waiting for that to come in, let me just say that if you have been here in this wonderful presentation and you are charged up and you're ready to go and you want to start at the archives here, then when you walk out this door, go straight ahead to the registration desk and you can get started there. Okay? Let's check quickly our online audience. Our online audience is quiet, so that comes to here. We'll go with President Henry.
Any special advice on large items of significance, whether it's a pulpit or a mural of a baptistry or a door, anything from an archivist standpoint on how to preserve, what to preserve?
That large format items, those are always tricky. Where the church where I grew up has some old stained glass from the old building that they have put in a clear glass window. So they've reused just two. They've reincorporated it. Is there a way to reincorporate, again, the door into or integrate it into use in some way? For example, is there one particular classroom where there are adults in the room and you're not going to have the kids with crayons on the old historic pulpit, where the pulpit could be used in a way that would maybe help with its preservation? In other words, if it's the old pulpit in a closet, I mean, the closet is a good storage solution. It does keep it safe. But it may be that you only need a short amount of time to elapse between the people who decided that keeping it in the closet is a measure to keep it safe and the folks who think it's in the closet because it's not needed. And next thing you know, it disappears with the next big clean out. So is there a way to use the pulpit? Maybe not in church, maybe not in the big auditorium or the big sanctuary, but is there a classroom? Is there an adult class where they can use it to teach from? And it's visible and it's used and it's less likely to get cleaned out or tossed out. It's always a challenge. Anything big is always a challenge. Especially large, fragile items, because that usage then, you can't use something that's fragile, like a baptistry painting on canvas. It's kind of designed for one thing, to be a baptistry painting. I guess you could hang it maybe in the church library, but you need a big wall. You need a wall as big as the baptistry. If the wall behind the baptistry is bigger than any wall in your church, then you either cut down the thing, we can't cut it down. What do we do with it? We can't keep it, we can't throw it away. It's tricky. That's a bad answer, but it's tricky. Yeah. You have my sympathy. We've got some oversized items kind of off by themselves in oversized storage, and it's just a mess. But that's what it will be. It will be a mess. It will be awkward, things sticking out in places, and we just try to do the best we can.
Another question here in the back. I'm actually glad I could make it here today. I went to Ancestry.com, but I happen to be in the area, and I work with a lot of church archivists who do a lot of work on preservation, and they're a terrific group all around the country. But I do find that most of the time that they have policies in place in which they've asked for individual churches to keep in mind that if they have membership records, maybe they should end up in their particular archive, so they can preserve them in paper or in digital a little bit. And I don't know if that comes up often in what you see in your experience also, that these type of records, if they are membership records, being preserved at a regional level, or an archivist who has that skill set to maintain them. I know they have oftentimes policies, but in some cases the churches just may not have known of the policy or otherwise been able to delegate that on to, another archivist. So I don't know if you see that occasionally, but I find that parallel, that sometimes the churches keep those materials and then they don't know what happens to them down the road.
Yes, indeed. Again, my professional experience has been working with Churches of Christ and Christian churches where there is no mandate from a governing board that says, send us an annual report or send us a membership roster or keep your membership updated or keep us informed. There was no expectation coming from outside. And in some cases, what I found is some of our churches just didn't generate them at all because it was always a small church. We always knew who was here. We didn't see a need. In fact, I've seen some references in some of our literature to these were people in about 1903 who were looking to write history and who were in 1903 were saying, we're losing a lot of our history, and people just didn't write anything down. And there's hardly anything saved. If you have anything, please help Brother Shepherd out as he's writing his history of the Churches of Christ in Nashville. Please help us. So even 120 years ago, among Churches of Christ, there was evidently enough folks that just weren't, or churches that just weren't keeping records, period. So 200 years later, we're looking for things that may never have been created. That's always kind of my fear, is we're looking for something, we'll never find it. It never existed in the first place. That's a downer to end on. Don't want to end on that, but yeah, some of those, my experience or my friends in Baptist and Methodist archives is a little more. There's a little more of an open dialogue between the churches and the historical agencies, because that agency exists as part of the parent denomination. So there's more of an awareness that, yes, we will keep your regional minutes or your session minutes or your presbytery minutes and your congregational minutes and your local, your yearbooks or your annual reports. Please send them, or more of an awareness of that.
All right. A round of applause, I think, is in order for our.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, John. Very good.
We thank you all for coming today and participating in this program. If you would like an extra copy or two of the handout, you can get those at the desk when you drop off your registration form, your survey rather. And then just a quick note to again say thank you to our two co-sponsors, Faulkner University and the Alabama Humanities Alliance. A lot of opportunities to participate in the life of the Department of Archives and History in the coming weeks. So we hope you'll come to those, and we hope to see you again. Thank you, everyone.